Especially today.
So on behalf of the SCA, Spartan Community Alliance, I would like to thank you all for coming. We really are trying hard to create Tish'a BeAb as a meaningful fast, not just an easy fast. We never had the opportunity to have Mrs. Labaton address us before, but we're very excited that she took the slot for this slot at this point of the day. I just want to make you aware of what's happening for the rest of the day. Immediately at 1 o'clock, when the class is over, we'll be transitioning all the different classes will be transitioning to the auditorium to have a tribute to the memory of Rabbi Labaton, a video from Rabbi Science, and a class by Rabbi until around 2:30. So we invite you all to attend, and at 2:30 for the rest of the day. Yes. Emily will be at 2:15. Tribute to Rabbi Labaton by Emily Labaton. At 2:30, according to the schedules, we have Rabbi Tobias and Rabbi Tal. We have
Thank you. Okay, let's get started. So we have this unusual practice on Tish'a BeAb of limiting, of restricting the range of Torah that we're allowed to study. So I wanted to start by asking you, what are some of the genres? If you had to think of what is appropriate Tish'a BeAb appropriate Tish'a BeAb Torah that we're allowed to study, what would you say? What are some of the genres of texts that we are permitted to look at on Tish'a BeAb? Don't be shy. I know, everybody's tired.
We read about the destruction, the galut.
Okay, we read about, themes, destruction, galut, exile, mourning, excellent. How does that translate into genre, into different literary genres of texts?
The Psalms.
Okay, Tehillim. In general, there's a lot of poetry. We see that in Tehillim, in the prophets, in Yirmiyahu, in the Middle Ages. We have people writing after their own destruction. 1,000 years after the Churban, after the destruction of the temple, we see people writing poems, poetic compositions, after something like the Crusades. And those are also recited more in the Ashkenaz liturgy than in the Sephardic liturgy. But we see those recited on Tish'a BeAb as well, and people, of course, study those. What else? Genres of writing.
Prophets.
Okay, prophets, more what actually happened, not just poems, so historical records. Very good. What else? Keynote, I would put that in the category of poetry. Good. Yeah.
Also history.
History. So history up through the modern period.
History of the period, yeah.
History of the period of the first and second destruction of the temple, but historical records of all tragedies, including the Holocaust. And of course, on Tish'a BeAb, it's a unique opportunity that there is no prohibition against Milacha, so you can watch movies. And that's been kind of a new modern way of educating. Okay? There's also, of course, legal genre of writing, so you can study the halachot of Tish'a BeAb, the laws relating to Tish'a BeAb. What I want to do today is look at but I want to look at a different literary genre, and that is the genre of stories. And I want to look at two stories which relate to Tish'a BeAb. The first one that we're going to look at is directly related to Tish'a BeAb, and it's actually recited, I don't think it's recited in the Syrian keynote, it is recited in the Ashkenaz keynote, and it's part of the 10 Sara Harugei Malchut. Is that recited in the keynote, in the Syrian keynote? Yeah, it is? Okay. So it's also, so here's the distinction. On Yom Kippur, it's recited in the Ashkenaz liturgy. The idea of these 10 martyrs. We're going to look at the story of one of these martyrs, Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion. We're not going to look at the entire story. We're going to look at a section of the story. And I want to And I think that if we think about mourning, if we think about grief, I would say that the genre of stories is a unique way of relating to grief and of relating to tragedy. And I think if for people who have sat Shiva, a lot of Shiva is you sit and you listen to stories and you tell stories, and it's a very concrete way of relating to, of understanding tragedy, trauma, and things like that. And at the end of the class, I want to think a little bit about what this says, what the use of stories might tell us about, more deeply about Tish'a BeAb and the role that it plays in our lives. Okay, let's get started. As we read the first story about Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion, I want to give you a little bit of historical context. This story happens. There's a lot of discussion among scholars whether it's historically accurate, how historically accurate. We'll put that question aside for the time being. But it purportedly happens during the time of the Hadrianic persecutions. Any ideas? When was that relative? First of all, when's the Churban Bayit Sheni? When's the destruction of the Second Temple? 70 CE. So when are these Hadrianic persecutions? The persecutions at the hand of Hadrian the emperor?
50 years later.
Okay, great. 40, 50 years later. Great. So in the 2nd century CE. So that's the historical context. Hadrian was an exceptionally cruel emperor who outlawed things like Brit Milah, we'll come back to that, and Talmud Torah, and lots of other things. What was that?
The moon. The sack of the moon.
Okay, great. A whole host of laws, and in general was known to be a really terrible persecutor of the Jewish people. As we go along, we're going to see that there's a major preoccupation in this story of theodicy. Theodicy meaning the justification of God's ways. Maybe you've heard of this book. I don't remember who the author is. Harold, somebody, thank you, Kushner. Why do bad things happen to good people? And the converse, why do good things happen to bad people? And we'll see that there are different ways, there are different methods of justifying this phenomenon. And as we read, I want you to take note of different methods, different techniques, if you will, of justifying terrible occurrences. And of course, you can understand why that's a natural impulse after something like the Churban and in the midst of persecution. Why is God doing this to us? How do we answer this question? And we'll see different ways that in this one story, different, even competing impulses to answer this question. Okay, let's start. Everybody with me? Any questions? Okay. They brought Rabbi Hanina, the son of Tradion. These are the Romans. They're bringing him to the tribunal and said, "Why did you engage in Torah?" He said to them, "This is what the Lord my God, this is what Hashem commanded me." Immediately they sentenced him to burning, his wife to execution by the sword, and his daughter to sit in a prostitute's booth. Okay, so we have this family unit. They're all getting punished for Hanina's crime. Him to burning. Pay close attention here. For he used to pronounce the holy name literally. So he used to take the tetragrammaton, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, and pronounce it letter by letter, which is forbidden. How is it possible that he did such a thing? We have a tradition that Abba Shaul says that also one who pronounces the holy name literally has no place in the world to come. How is it possible that a rabbi like this committed a sin which inevitably repudiates his place in Olam Haba? How is that possible? Oh, he did it for the purpose of self-instruction. Okay, then we have a little bit of a back and forth. So he didn't do it just to do it. He did it in order to understand it, in order to teach himself. Okay, first paradigm of theodicy. What is this? Why do bad things happen to good people? What was that?
Bad thing.
They sin. Exactly. They sin. That is the first paradigm. Rabbi Hanina sinned. He's actually not such a martyr. We call him, he's part of this Asara Harugei Malchut, these 10 martyrs. He's not such a martyr. He actually sinned and he actually deserved his punishment. His wife for execution by the sword because she did not censure him. She didn't tell him to stop. That's kind of a classic. Let's just leave that alone. And his daughter to sit in a prostitute's booth. For Rabbi Yochanan said she was once walking among the great of Rome, and they said, "How beautiful are the steps of this maiden," and she immediately became more meticulous about her steps. Okay, this kind of tit for tat with his daughter. What strikes you about these sins? What would you say if you had to kind of characterize these sins?
They weren't actual physical things being taken out. It was things that were, kind of like in their minds.
That's an interesting point, Sonia, because I see what you're saying, but with Rabbi Hanina, he's actually vocalizing the Shem Hashem instead of kind of cogitating on it. So that I didn't think of that kind of dynamic. That's something to think about. Okay. Yeah, Ayala.
It's a little bit of a lack of modesty. The way, like he's saying God's name, she's like being conscious of her steps more.
Provocative, interesting. Okay, so there's something that kind of runs a theme of like self-aggrandizement almost that runs through them. Okay. Yeah. Gina.
To me, they seem stretched. Like these people would never do any of these. Well, except for the censure. I don't know what to do with
All
that.
wives get linked for that. Okay.
But the other two, it's a stretch. He's not really running around saying that, and she's not really walking around like that. To me, it's a stretch.
Okay, it almost seems maybe that the sins couldn't have really happened.
Yeah, that for me.
Or you might say they actually seem kind of trivial. They actually don't seem to warrant the punishment.
Punishment doesn't fit the crime.
The punishment doesn't fit the crime. Those are two sides of the same coin. Okay, so let's keep that in mind that in the rabbinic world, we see this idea that on the one hand, every punishment equals sin, which many of us might feel uncomfortable with. And then on the other hand, that the sins that the rabbis come up with seem kind of petty. That's also consistent because we're talking about great rabbis. They couldn't have done something so terrible. There is this idea of Hashem metatekim at tzadikim kechut ha'sa'ara, that God judges tzadikim according to a very narrow thread. There's almost a double standard, if you will. But that is one kind of approach, one type of theodicy that we see, that Hanina actually sinned, his family sinned, and deserved the punishments. Let's move on. As the three of them went out from the tribunal, they justified for themselves the judgment. He said, Hatsur Tamim Pa'alo. Sorry. So they all said 3 psukim. Hanina said Hatsur Tamim Pa'alo in Dvarim, which the rock, his work is perfect. In other words, God could not be unjust. It says it in the Torah itself. His wife says, El emunah ve'ein avel, a continuation of that pasuk. He's a God of faithfulness without any kind of sin. And his daughter quotes a pasuk from Yirmiyahu, where same idea, Gadol ha'etza v'rav ha'aliyah, asher einecha pekuchot akol, etc., etc. Same idea that God is essentially, God's justice is perfect. Rebbe says, at the end of the second page, said Rebbe, how great were these righteous ones at the exact moment that they needed to do theodicy, that they needed to do tziduk hadin, these psukim came to their minds and they were capable of saying them. That is a dramatic moment, that in the exact time that they're being sentenced, what's their reaction? One of theodicy, one of tziduk hadin. That's extraordinary, and Rebbe is responding to this Rebbe, meaning, who is Rebbe here? Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi, redactor of the Mishnah. So the prominent personality who's reflecting on this process. I would say here we have another type of tziduk hadin, another type of theodicy. What would you say?
Let me
Yeah.
understand, who's punishing them?
The Romans. The Romans are punishing them.
Okay, so
This-
the Romans, we can't justify their actions because they don't believe in our religion, our God.
Save that thought. Save that thought for the next section, because the one question is going to be, are the Romans kind of the instruments of God? Exactly. Yeah.
What I think is maybe what's in the rabbi's mind is they're talking basically to the people of Israel. They're not trying to probably convey the accuracy of the story. And what their agenda is really that it could not be that they're talking to people, that such the normal people, they look at them as the guy who's really holy is in the hands of the Romans and God doesn't intervene. So they probably want to say, no, God intervened. It was his will. It wasn't the Romans' will. They put it in that context that otherwise, if it didn't deserve it, how come God has not intervened?
Okay, save it, because again, that question, it's not so clear. That question is going to come up in the next section. You're absolutely right to point to that. But it's a question. It's not. I wouldn't put a period next to that. Yeah. Sorry. What's your name?
Gabby.
Gabby.
What happens in difference to what the first group there, where they, that topic, so this one is more like, they didn't sin on that one, but they just don't understand God's ways.
Yes. Very nice. I would say that's a good formulation where they're walking out and they're saying whatever it is, whether we can identify the sin, whether we can't identify the sin, God's will, God's ways are just. No question about it. And the psukim, the articulation of the psukim express that. Very good. Let's move on. Everybody with me? Our rabbis taught. Okay. When Rabbi Yossi, the son of Kisma, was ill, Rabbi Hanina ben Shradion went to visit him. Rabbi Yossi said to Rabbi Hanina, Brother Hanina, don't you know that it is heaven that has ordained this nation to rule? For though she has destroyed his house, burnt his sanctuary, killed his pious ones, and caused his best ones to perish, still she is firmly established. So you hear this amazing echo of what people were saying during the time of the Roman Empire. We see this glorious Roman Empire. It's solid, it's stable. It must be that this is min hashamayim. We are being persecuted, we are being attacked, and yet the fact that the Roman Empire still exists must mean what? It's God's will. Exactly. This is all God's will. Yet I have heard about you that you sit and engage in Torah, publicly gather assemblies to, what does that mean? Makil kilot barabim, to teach. Presumably you're teaching Torah, again violating Hadrian's laws, and you keep a scroll resting in your lap. You're like I don't feel like the translation is actually reflective of this. It's a gorgeous image of Rabbi Hanina sitting there clutching to himself the Sefer Torah. Hanina says to him, you could actually imagine this conversation taking place in, around here in the 2016. Min hashamayim yirachamu, the heavens will show mercy. What does Rabbi Yossi say back? I am telling you reasonable facts. That's also not a great translation. There's always this kind of tension. How literally do you want to translate, and how much do you want to get a more felicitous translation which gets to kind of the meat of the story? And I feel like I erred on the side of a literal translation. He's saying, I am telling you, Devarim Shel Ta'am. I'm giving you logic. I'm giving you reason. And you're telling me, Min HaShamayim Yirachamu? What are you telling me? This is nonsense. God is not, and this goes to the question, God is not, Hanina is saying God will intervene. Some vague statement. And Rabbi Yossi is saying, no, he's not going to intervene. You're violating Hadrian's laws, and you're going to meet your punishment. It's cause and effect, Hanina. Hanina says and he says, it will surprise me if they do not burn both you and the Torah scroll in fire. You're going to get punished. Not only that, what do you think he means by that? It's not just that you're going to get executed. That's for sure going to happen. And of course, because you can't let go of the Sefer Torah, it's going to burn the Torah. But what else is he saying?
The other rabbis and the other institutions
It's
will be
counterproductive.
There'll be more on them.
Okay, you're going to end up destroying the society or the Torah that you're aiming, that you can't let go of it. But it's counterproductive, exactly. So you are risking the Torah study and Jewish civilization for everybody. What you're doing is actually dangerous. Hanina says back to him, Rebbe, how do I stand with regard to the world to come? If it's true, what's going to happen to me? I want to just point your attention again to Olam Haba. First, we saw that Hanina might have committed a sin which would deny him entrance to Olam Haba. And here we see Hanina is anxious about his status vis-a-vis Olam Haba. Then you have this really interesting exchange, which we don't have time to go into. Yossi says, is there anything you've done? Is there anything, it's not clear, is there anything positive that you've done? Is there anything negative you've done? He said, I once mistook Purim money for my own charity money, and then I distributed of my own to the poor. It's not so clear whether he's saying, I did a great thing, or this is the worst sin that I've actually done. It's not so clear. What's interesting about this is it's not the first time that we have this deed of Hanina's mentioned, and it seems to reflect a bit of a tension between Gemilut Chasadim and Talmud Torah. We know that Hanina is committed to Talmud Torah. He can't let go of the Torah. Whether or not he's as good as in Gemilut Chasadim in that sphere is not so clear. And that seems to be the theme, maybe. But then Rabbi Yossi says, well, then I wish your portion would be my portion. In other words, you're guaranteed entrance to Olam Haba. Okay, let's keep on moving. Any questions up until now? Yeah.
When you say what he did, is that a way of doing Tish'a BeAb? Like you would say what he did openly?
Maybe. It's not, it's an ambiguous line. It's a hard line. It's really kind of a hard nut to crack. We know that in the Babylonian Talmud, the stories from the Babylonian Talmud, the rabbis are concerned about this relationship between Talmud Torah and Gemilut Chasadim. They're these great advocates of Talmud Torah. Where does Gemilut Chasadim come into play here? So it might be that. It might also be that he's saying, this is the extent to which I go to do Gemilut Chasadim. Yeah.
I think it's a commentary on this idea of Rabbi Hanania being a martyr, and this whole idea of him worrying about Olam Haba at this moment, and how trivial it is between Gemilut Chasadim and Talmud Torah that he's looking at the next world, and I think there really is a judgment on that type of thinking.
Okay. It's a judgment on that type of thinking.
In other words, the idea that you're worrying about trivialities between this and that, the whole society is going up.
Oh, okay. Interesting. In other words, he's worried. This is all about him. He's a zealot.
He's a martyr thinking.
He's thinking like a martyr, but he's not actually being practical. And you have to be practical in this day and age. Rabbi Yossi's point of view is you have to be practical. Interesting. And this is also, it's the same kind of like he's looking at the trees, not the forest. Okay, very nice. Okay, it was said that within a few days, Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma died, and all the great men of Rome went to his burial and made great eulogies for him. That's also fascinating. Not only do we have two different approaches to Rome, we have two diametrically opposed approaches to Rome. But what is that? How does that manifest itself?
Different reactions by Rome.
Yeah, on the one hand, you have Romans coming to Rabbi Yossi's funeral and eulogizing him. And then on the other hand, when they come back, they find Rabbi Hanina sitting, and of course, he's doing what he always does. He can't stop himself from doing. He's engaging in the Torah, he's teaching, and he has his Torah scroll resting in his lap. What do they do to him? They take hold of him, they wrap him in the Torah scroll, they place bundles of branches around him, and they set him on fire. That's not enough. They bring tufts of wool, which they had soaked in water, place them over his heart yes, and we know, by the way, that's a feature of Roman society. And I was reading something, in preparing for this, I was reading something really interesting. It's not apologetics. The Romans were known for torture, for kind of this capricious kind of justice, where they have this kind of illusion of justice, but the way that they treat the vulnerable people in society, horrendous. And that's in contrast to let's say, specifically what I was reading was contrasting it to Sasanian Persia. So when this is taking place, they're living under Roman rule. But the people who are writing this story and editing this story, the editors of the Talmud, they're not living under Roman rule. They're living in Babylonia, not in Palestine, and they're writing under the rule of the Sasanians. The Sasanians were much more humane, let's say, to slaves, and their justice was actual justice, things like that. So they're torturing Hanina, and of course they're torturing him through the instrument of the Sefer Torah. By the way, we have this image of fire and water. Does that recall it? Torah is compared to the prominent imagery associated with Torah, fire and also water, which is also, interesting. What happens? He's burnt. Now think about the role of this prolonged torture. His daughter said to him, "Father, that I should see you like this kind of anguish." And what does he say? He says, "If I alone were being burnt, it would have been hard. But now that I am burning together with the Torah, he who will have God, who will have regard, who will, let's say, take revenge on the Torah, will also take revenge for me." Okay, that's kind of another idea of theodicy, by the way. How so? What's the idea here? What's kind of, if you have to unpack it conceptually?
Some of this is L'Shem Hashem, and he's sacrificing on behalf of the Jewish people.
Okay, we'll get to that. How do you see that here, though? He's saying...
With the scroll.
Oh, okay. So I didn't catch that. So he's burning with a scroll. In other words, he's doing this for the sake of the Jewish people. He's doing this for the Torah. Great. We'll come back to that. That will come out even more powerfully later on. You're absolutely right. Here I would say simply, there's going to be punishment. The Romans are going to be punished for this terrible thing that they're doing. Another case of justifying God's ways. There's going to be punishment. There's going to be actual justice. Okay, we move from the daughter, who's the most intimately involved. We move outside. His students. His students say to him, "Rebbe, what do you see?" And this is incredible. He says, "The parchment is being burnt, but the letters, the otiot parchot." Where else do we see that image of something being broken, or you have a hint, and yet the letters fly away.
Drash on the breaking of the law.
The breaking of the luchot. So we have these two, this same theme. What does that say to you? What is using, first of all, where is that, what's the context of that midrash? Things that return to their source, exactly. Things that return to their source. So what do we get by invoking the luchot? What would you say? What is Chanina, what's he saying as he's being burnt? He's saying a few different.
Come back to the original, the eternal.
Okay, the letters, so you can burn the Torah, it's irrelevant. The essence is preserved. So in going back to this Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma idea, it doesn't matter if the Torah is being burnt. It doesn't matter because Torah will stay, will remain. It's indestructible. Okay, what else?
It reminds me of the burning bush, like Hashem, the bush.
Okay, I didn't think about that. Great.
You could say forever,
Not
nothing.
consumed.
Yes, it's there's a certain eternal truth to it. I would also say, by the way, that the not so much with the burning bush, but with the luchot, that's like one of the low points in Jewish history. What is that? Chet HaEgel, exactly. That's a low point in Jewish history, and yet, what happens? There's restoration. There's teshuvah. Yeah. Great, excellent. This is a metaphor for Hanina himself, that he and the Torah are their bodies, so to speak. His body is a parchment, the body of the Torah is the parchment. They're both being burnt, their physical selves are destroyed, but their souls are going back to their source. Beautiful. You might even say the same thing about the Beit HaMikdash. You have the destruction of a physical entity. That's not what's actually primary. That's not paramount. Good. Okay. Then the students say, so remember, the only way that we have the time for all of these conversations is because he's being tortured. As he's being tortured, he's conversing with these people. The students say, open your mouth and let the fire enter. He said, no, I can't do that. God who gave is the only the one who can take it away. I can't injure myself. Where's the irony there? What's the irony? Especially when you think about Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma. He seemed to pursue that. He seems to be pursuing death over and over and over again. And yet, at the moment where at the very end, he refuses to do anything to actually expedite his death. By the way, that's a source for people who are interested in medical ethics. That's a source that's used, this story is used for thinking about things like euthanasia and other questions that come up in that context. So you have the students, you have the daughter, you go to the students, and then we'll go to the executioner. Yeah, Freda.
Is he glorifying martyrdom? That thought?
Let nobody injure himself.
Well, that he's prolonging this agony in front of his students because God is telling him, that only he can. It just seems, and also to reference the tablets too. I mean, just raises the whole thing up to a whole other level.
It's possible that he is glorifying martyrdom. It's not so clear that the people writing the story are glorifying martyrdom. I would say Hanina is an ambiguous figure. He's not Rabbi Akiva, it's unreserved. He is Rabbi Akiva's martyrdom, he comes out pure hero. Hanina, not so much. He might have sinned, number one. It's not clear that he's adopting the right approach to Rome, number two. So I would say he might be doing that. I think his character in the story is a little bit ambiguous, which makes it interesting.
He also wants to see Rome get their just punishment in the future, even if he can make it easier or something.
Okay.
I'm not going to help you get a more or less punishment later on.
Okay.
You are the instrument, and you.
Great. Although that's a great transition to his interaction with the executioner. The executioner. So we go from an intimate relationship to a distant relationship, to the other with a capital O. The executioner then says to him, Rabbi, if I raise the flame and take away the tufts of wool from over your heart, will you bring me into Olam Haba? Yes, swear to me. He swore to him. The executioner raises the flame, removes the tufts of wool from over his heart, and his soul departed speedily. The executioner then jumped and threw himself into the fire. And heavenly, the bat kol announces, Rabbi Hanina and the executioner are summoned. They're muzmanim l'chaye olam haba. They are summoned to life in the world to come. Rebbe heard this. This is the same Rebbe who was impressed by the three family members' recitation of the psukim. Rebbe hears it, he weeps and says, Yesh koneh olamo b'sha'ah achat v'yesh koneh olamo b'kama shanim. So you have some people like Hanina. It's this process, it's this agonizing process of struggling, of trying to do mitzvot, of trying to do good. He gets olam haba, of course. But who else gets olam haba? Somebody in a split second who ironically, he gets eternal life. How does he get his eternal life, the executioner? By killing somebody, by taking away somebody else's temporal life. That's how he gets his eternal life, and by jumping into the fire. So he saves somebody and jumps into the fire, and in that way achieves immortality.
And without real suffering, without real suffering.
Right. It's not a process for the executioner. For the torturer, the word is really, for the torturer, it's not a process, but it's a radical metamorphosis. Radical, much more than Hanina. Hanina, we expect this to happen. For the executioner, it's instantaneous, and yet it happens he goes from A to Z in the space of an instant. It's amazing. Yeah, Jacob.
It's also a very funny rabbinic version of the rabbis becoming the ultimate judges of the rodents.
Okay, explain.
Meaning you would think the executioner is the ultimate judge of the rabbis, but the rabbis are really the one who decides who's going to fall on the bar.
Fantastic. So Hanina is really the executioner's judge. Very good. Yeah.
Also commentary on what happens after these martyrs. I mean, the influence that Judaism has on Rome later on in the beginnings of Christianity. They're accepting they've been affected. The empire.
Okay, that's a perfect transition. I could have paid you to transition me to the next source, because we'll see that even more clearly in the next source. And I apologize if the font. I was trying to save trees, but I'm hurting your eyes. Okay, the next source, we see that even more powerfully. And I would say this source is less directly related to Tish'a BeAb. I don't know if it's ever invoked in the context of Tish'a BeAb. And the reason why I came across it was because of the ending, which we'll get to. But I actually think there are some interesting comparisons and contrasts here. So as we read this story, think about how this story compares to the Hanina story. By the way, there's a third story which has the same ending of Rebbe crying and saying this, expressing this idea that some acquire eternal life in a minute, others it takes them years and years and years. The last story is, we don't have time for it, and it's actually a little bit too provocative for today. So, but if you're interested in it, I urge you to go look it up, and I'm happy to give you the source for it. Okay. So there are three places where we have this line. I feel like it would be intellectually dishonest if I didn't tell you about the third, but we're not going to read it together. But let's look at the second. What is this story about Tish'a bar Shalom? A Roman emperor, Caesar, we don't know, by the way, he's not identified here, but there are people who identify him as Hadrian. So again, the Hadrianic persecutions, and we'll get to why. It's interesting how he's identified as Hadrian, who hated the Jews, asked the following of the important members of the government. A man who has a growth, or other people translate it as worm, on his foot, should he cut it off? What's the word for cut it off? Look inside it for people who read Hebrew, or it's translated. Good, the same root as Kitiyah. Kitiyah is the person. Tish'a bar Shalom. Yikta'ena. Same root. So we have this, the beginning of a pun. Should he cut it off and live in comfort, or should he leave it alone and suffer? What do the Roman notables answer? Yikta'ena. Cut it off and live in comfort. What's the subtext? The Jewish people are the growth or the worm. Do I destroy them, or do I leave it alone? Kitiyah bar Shalom, who is a Roman notable, speaks. He says to him, you can't overcome all of them, for it is written, he's quoting a pasuk from Zechariah, I have spread you out, ki ke'arba ruchot, like the four winds of the heavens, I have spread you out. And then he says, he's using basically a Talmudic expression, my ka'amar. What is this verse saying? So this is a Roman notable who's basically acting like a rabbi. He's actually quoting from someplace else in the Talmud. What is he saying? If it said he scattered them to the four winds, what should it say? Le'arba ruchot. Exactly. Ki le'arba ruchot hashamayim perasti. But instead it says ke'arba ruchot. So this is like classic Talmudic, back and forth. I take one letter and I interpret an entire thing from it. So he says, because it says ke'arba ruchot, just as the world cannot exist without the winds, so the world cannot exist without Israel. So that's his answer to the Caesar, why he should not destroy the Jewish people. What would you say about this answer? What is it? It's a bit of it's like jousting. It's some kind of verbal, witty repartee. Exactly. Which is interesting, by the way, given all of these puns, which we're seeing between Kitiyah, Yikta'ena, and we'll go on to the next one. In addition, people will call you a mutilating kingdom. Would somebody find that in the Hebrew or transliterate? Malchuta Kitiyah. People will call you a mutilating kingdom. So we have Kitiyah bar Shalom. We have this Yikta'ena, which carries the idea of surgery, some kind of surgical removal. Yikta'ena, the Katiyah, which carries this idea of murderous. People will call you a mutilating kingdom. And then we'll keep on going. We'll see one more pun. The emperor replied, "You have spoken. One who bests the emperor must be thrown into the furnace." So actually, this line and this kind of punning points to Hadrian, because something that we know about Hadrian is that he considered himself a master of language and poetry and punning, and we see this kind of back and forth that goes on. He's also infamous for being very insecure and capricious, whimsical, and kills anybody who he feels even the slightest bit threatened by. So that's one thing that points to Hadrian. And by the way, it's interesting in the broader Talmudic context here. There's a line which says, "How do we know that Rome was a despicable kingdom?" Because they didn't read and write in their own language. They didn't sign official documents in Latin, but they signed official documents in Greek. Exactly. So you have this whole kind of interesting context of punning, language, who can outdo somebody in this verbal, witty repartee, but it carries huge consequences. It seems, what would you say? Are the Jewish people saved or not? Does Kitiyah save the Jewish people?
No.
You don't think so?
I don't know.
I don't know. I'm not sure either. You think not?
Well, why do we think he's necessarily not Jewish, although he's clearly he's among the noble Romans who are discussing this?
Well, you'll see. The end of the story. I don't want to ruin the end. The end of the story makes it absolutely clear that he's not Jewish.
Even though his name is Bar Shalom.
Yes. Maybe there are some scholars who identify him as somebody named Flavius, who is a Roman notable, who is a Judaizing Roman. But we know, so maybe he's given a different name, along with all of these puns. Okay. So it's not clear whether or not he saves the Jewish people, but what is clear is that he, in trying at least to save the Jewish people, what happens? He's martyred. He himself is martyred. When they were leading Tish'a away, a matrona, a lady, said to him, "Woe for the ship that sails without paying its tax." He fell upon his foreskin and cut it off. Last one, kata'ah. He gives himself a brit milah. It's interesting. There are some manuscripts which say that he does it with his teeth. So again, some say that here, the printed edition of the Talmud, it doesn't say anything. But that's where that makes it even more, I would say, even more graphic, even more grotesque, but even more powerful. He says, and then what's the word for cut it off? He cuts off his foreskin. What's the word?
Milah.
No, kata'ah. You would expect it to be milah, but it's not. It's going along with a pun. So we have surgery, murder, circumcision, and kitiyah. They all are punning on the same Hebrew word. What's amazing is that there's a scholar who I got part of the translation from, Howard Jacobson, who points to a Latin root, caedo, C-A-E-D-O, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, where you get the same pun. And it's related to the word Caesar, where you have the exact same, you have the exact same constellation of meanings, which is just, you see the rabbis who are trying to get a good translation from the Latin. Interesting, they know enough Latin to do that, perhaps. And again, this idea that we can out-Latin the Romans. We can even do it better, maybe. He says, "I have paid the tax, now I pass on." So we know he's not Jewish. He doesn't have a milah. He doesn't have any brit milah.
How does Jewish?
Now, so that's a question. Did he convert? There is a manuscript of the Talmud which calls him a ger, and the story is followed by Onkelos, who is known to be a Roman convert. But halachically, there is one opinion which says if you just do brit milah, that's enough. But halachically, what else do you need?
Why is it called a rags?
Tevilah.
Yeah, you need tefillah, and it needs to be in front of rabbi. So is he a convert or is he a righteous Gentile? It's not clear.
Why is circumcision equated to a tax?
Why is that the metaphor?
Yeah, why is it tax a metaphor?
Maybe it looks like he wants a lamada, but if you're not circumcised, you can't just get
Why a tax? Why, you look at it as tax.
No, but Madrona does. She does.
What was that?
It's just the price you have to pay to get in.
It's the price you have to pay to get in.
That means only Jews get into Olam Haba.
Well, no, I wouldn't draw that conclusion. I would say the expectation, if Kitiyah wants to go in, yes. And think about him in comparison to the executioner. They're both saving or trying to save Jews, but they have to do something else. They also there needs to be a certain physical act which gets them in. You're pointing to an important tension. Is he Jewish? Is he not Jewish? Why does he need it? We know that it's not only Jews, by the way, because the executioner goes in. He doesn't do brit milah.
Is this addressing all those that are online wanting to become Jewish in this time period?
Is this addressing them? I would point to this as the exception more than the rule. I think these are paragons. Yes, Sonia.
The word karet always reminds you of being cut away from the Jewish people, like you're cut off.
Right. It's not karet. It's not. Though that's kaf resh taf.
Okay.
But you're right. I'm happy you said that because there is this built-in. Think about what happens. The emperor wants to surgically remove the Jews. He wants to cut off the Jews, and the person bests him with this play on that word, right?
Brings them back in almost.
Yeah. And then he does, the person who saves them, the person who prevents the Jews or tries to prevent the Jews from being cut off, ends up cutting himself. So there's this, the use of the same word is doing almost opposite things. There's a kind of destruction and a kind of redemption. Yeah.
Do you think it's possible that while probably there was a Roman noble who spoke on behalf of the Jews and took their cause to his heart, that the Brit Milah and the Kata'ah and was then in addition embellished by the rabbis to show a message to the Jewish people that suffering by Jewish people are willing to suffer
Has meaning.
by Jews is going to bring them to Olam Haba, including the Jews, if they jump into the fire. That's why the Olam is, the B'Sha'ah Chak is the act of Kiddush Hashem, trying to suffer for the cause of God to bring you Olam Haba. So they took even this Roman who probably did not do any of that, but that was done for the sake of the Jews.
I would say it's possible. I wouldn't say it's necessary. I wouldn't eliminate the possibility of Romans actually doing these things offhand.
In the context of somebody who defends the Jews and then he's hurting himself and all this kind of things, I'm not saying there were not Romans who did not convert.
Right.
But the story is put together to really impart also this lesson.
I would say, I might say that, but think more contemporaneously. Think about the Holocaust. Think about righteous Gentiles. Think about, there are thousands of righteous Gentiles who essentially did this. Not this, but this. So I wouldn't be so skeptical. Look, I think it depends how you read these stories. Are they historical? Are they literary? Are they both? So,
or combination that has some lesson to teach or a message to impart that the rabbis is very important to them. They're not.
Yes, agreed. 100%.
A historical.
Yes.
Obviously, they come up with
agreed
moralistic judgment at the end. So and that's probably what was important to them.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. Hold on. Let's finish this up because I just got my 5-minute notice. Okay. I have paid the tax. Now I pass on. As he was being cast into the furnace, he said, "Let all my possessions go to Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues." Rabbi Akiva went out and interpreted, "It shall be to Aharon and his sons, half to Aharon, half to his sons." He's talking about the truma, the gift which the Jewish people give to the Kohanim, to the priests. So Kitiyah, his gift to Rabbi Akiva is tantamount to the truma of the Jewish people. Half goes to Aharon, half goes to his sons, which seems to indicate that Rabbi Akiva is accepting Kitiyah's action. He's accepting him as a Jew. He's giving his truma. A heavenly voice then declared, Kitiyah bar Shalom is summoned. We have the Bat Kol is summoned to life in the world to come. Rebbe wept and said, "Some people acquire eternity in 1 hour, others after years." Okay, we don't have any time to really to analyze the comparisons and the contrasts. I think it pays to think about what's similar, what's different. What I would leave you with is I was trying to figure out what's the message? What's the message like the rabbis? What's the message for us of this idea of the bat kol, of some acquire olam haba in eternity, some it takes them, years and years some acquire olam haba in a moment, some acquire olam haba after years and years and years. And I couldn't come up with anything. Everything I came up with felt kind of trivial. And what I think this, at least for me, the message is that there's actually no message. There's no message for us. what we do on Tish'a BeAb, the grief that we're trying to feel, that we're trying to embody, is a very pale imitation of what people felt in the immediate aftermath of the Churban, in the immediate aftermath of the Holocaust. And I would say that to the degree that there's an impossible chasm between our situation and, what the Jewish people actually went through during the Churban, during the Hadrianic persecutions, during the Holocaust, there's a limit to how much we can bridge that chasm. But an incredible window into those experiences is through stories. It's through the stories, whether they're historically accurate or not. It's through the stories of people who did go through it, and how those stories were presented, and how they were constructed, and what they went through, and how they reacted. I mean, the image of a father and a daughter saying, Abba echa kazeh, something like that. I don't have the exact quotation. That's something that's incredibly poignant. It's incredibly powerful. And what it reminded me of was the experience of reading, I don't know if you've read this, Yafa Eliach's Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. It's stories which I think are an incredibly powerful way of entering into those realities, which we can't actually embody, we can't actually experience, but we can start to understand through that human element, through the human elements, which are really embedded in, naturally, organically, in stories. Tizkula Nechamat Zion.